Hi, this is Adventure Alan, and we're going to talk about everything you wanted to know about sleeping pads in today's video. And we all intuitively know how important a good night's sleep is to our enjoyment in the backcountry and our backpacking trip. It restores our physical health after a long, hard day. It restores our mental health. We're in better spirits, and those better spirits just make the trip go a lot better. But we've also been on the other side of that, where we got a cold, uncomfortable night's worth of sleep. Maybe we just eked through a few hours of not so great actual time sleeping, and it can have the opposite effect of a trip. We've all been there. We don't want to go there again. And this video is going to help you get a better night's sleep in the backcountry. So we're going to talk about sleeping pads because they're so critical to that good night's sleep. And I'm going to just go through some of the key points that I'm going to cover. So the first point is sleeping pad RValues, what they are, and why you should care. A lot of people pick sleeping pads by their comfort, how comfortable it is, but we're going to say that the RValue sleeping bag is probably one of the most important things that you need to look at. We're going to talk about what sleeping pads we like and why. We'll give you a few tips on how to use them better, the strengths and the pros and cons from one pad to another. And we'll also talk about which sleeping pad is right for which season. You can either pick a pad that'll get you through all seasons, or you can sort of hunt and pick and maybe have a couple pads that you can change from season to season. And then finally, there's been a lot of confusion and some consternation over a new sleeping pad RValue test that has caused sort of a kerfuffle in the backpacking world. And we're actually very positive about it. We think it's a good thing, and we'll tell you why. And then finally, maybe so you watch this video all the way to the end, one of the outcomes of these new therm-a-rest sleeping pads, because therm-a-rest just came out with some new pads, and the new test is, did those pads actually get warmer or colder? And we've talked to therm-a-rest engineers and some other experts, and we've done our own analysis and work, and we think we know the answer, and we'll tell you what that answer is and how we arrived at it. So anyway, that's enough of the overview. I'm going to put my shoes on, get some of the sleeping pads, and start talking about what's what. Okay, so let's talk sleeping pad RValues. And the first thing is an RValue is just, forget all the physics and engineering. RValue is just an indication of how warm a sleeping bag is, how well it'll insulate you from the ground. And it was pretty much adopted from the rating of building insulation on how warm that insulation would keep a building from the outside cold air. And they just took that and rated sleeping bags as if it was a piece of building insulation, like a piece of fiberglass or foam. And in fact, the original RValue sleeping bag test that therm-a-rest and Cascade Design originated was a modification of a test for building insulation. And it just measures that, when you're sleeping on this, that the ground doesn't suck all the warmth out of you. So the higher the RValue, the warmer you sleep, the less warmth the ground sucks out of you. And here's a pretty big reveal, but when they do the standard sleeping bag tests, where they test how warm a sleeping bag is, the test by definition uses a pretty damn warm sleeping pad, arguably a sleeping pad warmer than most people use. So if you're sleeping cold at night, it may not be your sleeping bag that's to blame. You may not have a warm enough ground pad. So to give you an idea of what that means, the RValue for the standard ISO sleeping bag test is an R4.8. This is a smaller version, but this is a Z-Lite pad. It's a folding Z-Rest pad. It's very popular with ultralight backpackers, used very frequently. This only has an RValue of 2.0, so it's less than half the insulating value of the pad in that sleeping test. This Uberlite pad I have over here, a relatively newer one, is also around R.2, so less than half of that value. What I have right here, which is the Neo or X-Lite, which is probably the most popular pad out there. It looks very similar to this pad over here. I'll talk about it in a second. This is only an R4.2. So it's actually not as warm as the pad that test is done with. Probably get you by most of the year, but when it starts to get really cold, it may not be quite warm enough. Which is why we like this pad. This is our favorite pad. It's the Neo Air Women's X-Lite, and it has an extra layer of Mylar in it that makes it a lot warmer than this pad. This pad is an R4.2. This pad here is an R5.4. It's a lot warmer. These pads weigh the same, the regular X-Lite versus the women's. This one is a little bigger, weighs 12 ounces. This is just slightly smaller and weighs 12 ounces, but again, it's a crap load warmer. And it's why Allison and I both use this pad. In fact, most of the men I know use this women's pad. It's plenty long enough for most folks. And it's going to give you consistently over a broader range of conditions the warmer night sleep. And here's sort of a tip for you cold sleepers out there. And this is a mattress that doesn't get talked about a lot. This is the therm-a-rest X Therm. And this is a whopping R6.9, but it only weighs 3 ounces more than this pad. So, and the cost is relatively similar. So if you sleep cold, this is a relatively inexpensive way, assuming you didn't buy this pad already, for just 3 ounces to upgrade and get a lot warmer. And the final tip that I'll just sort of throw in here is that all these R values are with these pads fully blown up. I mean, just plumped up as much as you can. They actually aren't as comfortable like that. And so if you're like me, most people, you'll blow it up and then maybe you'll even bleed a little air out because it's like super comfortable. And that's fine if it happens to be warm out, but as it gets colder and colder, if you want to achieve that full R5.4 or the R6.9, you're going to have to inflate those babies all the way up. And after they cool to the air temperature, you might take a couple huffs just before you get into bed to make sure that they're fully inflated. We have already introduced all the pads here. I don't think there are any players here that you haven't seen, except that I'm sitting on a ridge rest pad here, which is sort of the classic foam pad, and I may talk about it. But basically all the actors are out here, and we're going to talk about what pads we like and why. No mystery, this women's X-Lite Neo Air is our favorite pad. It's about the right size. It's light, it weighs only 12 ounces, and it's really warm. I actually slept on this pad on the southern Patagonian ice shelf, and I was fine. Allison was able to sleep, but it was just a tad cool. If I had to do it over again, I'd probably put her on this X Therm over here and just give her that extra bit of warmth. But other than camping on that ice shelf, this has pretty much been the pad that's done the job for us. And again, lots of people use this Neo or X-Lite. The difference between this and the women's pad has 2 layers of Mylar. The layers of Mylar reflect heat. They keep you warmer. It adds a little bit of weight each layer, but not that much. The advantage of this one is it's a little longer. So if you're a tall person, some people prefer this pad, but it's only got 1 layer of Mylar in it, so it's not as warm and it's not as adaptable to going down to colder weather conditions. And one of my hiking partners, who's 6'5", sleeps fine on this women's women's Neo Air pad. The new player on the block here is this Uberlight pad, and it weighs only 8 ounces, so it's 4 ounces lighter than this pad, but it's only an RValue. It's an RValue of 2.3, so it's half the warmth of this pad. For me, the cutoff point for this pad is right as it gets around freezing. I'm noticing that the pad is getting a little cool under me. I can still sleep, but I notice that the pad's getting cooler. If it got any cooler than that, probably wouldn't work for me. This definitely would not work for Allison around freezing. Allison would definitely want to be on this pad. Another pad, and again, I just have this little sit pad version of it, is this Z-Lite, this folding pad, and this is foam. Again, it's not very warm. It's not very comfortable, and it's only an RValue of 2.0. So it's not a favorite pad of ours. But as I go into the pros and lights of these pads, you'll see why some of these thru hikers use this pad. So that's a great segue into the next section of this, which is the pros and cons of a closed-cell foam pad like this and an inflating pad like this. Why do people like these? Well, they're cheap. This is like $30 to $50 depending on what size you want, and these are pushing $200. So for hikers that are on a budget, is a significant factor. You can't puncture this. There's literally, this is going to be as warm as it is and as comfortable as it is. Pretty much no matter what out in the field, you don't have to blow it up, you don't have to deflate it, both of which are a pain in the ass. And this is not slippery. So there are a number of advantages to this. One other disadvantage of this is these pads tend to lose their thickness over time. You sleep on them, and even in a number of weeks of use, they'll be thinner, which means that they are not quite as warm. In the summer, that may not matter. Looking at these Neo Air pads here, these are representative of the technologies available and what you might want to look at. Anyway, these mattresses, these are significantly warmer. They are way more comfortable. A lot of people, as you're pushing my age, just can't sleep on a foam pad like this and get a good night's sleep. And a lot of women who get a lot of pressure on their hips also find these pads insanely more comfortable than foamies. They take up less volume in your pack. I mean, the whole big folded up version of this, most people have to stick outside the pack because they can't fit it in their pack. The cons, they're way more expensive. I mean, these pads are all running in the range of $200, which is a healthy chunk of change. We have punctured a few in the field. We've field repaired them, but that's not going to happen to these foam pads. They're a pain in the ass to inflate and deflate, whether you blow it up by breath or use a bag. It's a pain, and it actually takes a fair amount of time in the morning to get the air out of and roll them back up. They also tend to be a bit slippery. You can slide around on them, which is not a problem with this. And they're a bit noisy, which some people, you can hear that. So they're a bit noisy. So there's no perfect choice here, but by and large, we're sort of sticking with this pad. I may play around with this and out in the desert or the summer, but for most people, we think this women's Neo Air is probably a solid first pad to look at. One of the questions that people have is sort of like, what pad do I use for what season? And we see there's sort of 3 types of seasons. We see high summer, which is like there really isn't much of a chance of frost. If it is, it's a brief light frost in the morning, like in the Sierras. Then there's like 3 seasons, which we include the shoulder seasons of late fall and early spring, which you can again get winter-like conditions. And you might have a pretty cold night or morning in there when you are below freezing. And then the final season is when it's full-on winter, when the temperature might not go above freezing during the day. So for high summer, you know, you could go with either of these pads. If you wanted to go with the foamy, you could go with the Z-Lite pad here. R2.0 is probably good enough, or you could go with this Uber Light. There's a, you know, this is a little more delicate pad, probably requires a little more care. There's a little bit of more debate about whether this is quite durable enough. We haven't had any problems with it, but you know, if you were just planning on camping in the high summer, or you were going to specialize and have one for high summer and one for colder temps, these are options. This actual standard Neo Air is another option. It's, you know, at its RValue of 4.2, it's probably plenty warm enough for summer, even moving into spring and fall. And it's got a little more room on it. If you want a pad that's sort of like all round, except for winter, it's really going to do the job no matter where you are. Again, this women's Neo Air is our top choice. It's what Alice and I use. It's what most of the people we backpack with use. It's hard to go wrong with this pad. And that would be our recommendation for this sort of 3-season, shoulder season of early spring and late fall. Finally, we'll talk about winter-like conditions, pads for that, where, you know, it's going to be below freezing even during the day and very cold at night. And there are a couple things you can do. One, you can go to this X-Therm pad, which its raison d'etre is to be a winter pad. Or you can do a trick, which is kind of fun. The R values on sleeping pads are additive. So if you add an R2 pad to an R5.4 pad, you get an R7.4, R7 point pad, a very warm pad indeed. So a lot of people take a kicker pad like this, or that's exactly what this is. This is a full-length ridge rest that I've cut down to torso length to be a kicker pad on either this or this, right where my torso is. And, you know, if you put this 2 onto that, this is like almost like a 9, it's like an R9 pad or something, this combination. So that's a nice trick to use. So let's talk about the new 2018 ASTM test for sleeping pads. As I said earlier, the original test was done by Cascade Design's therm-a-rest. It was based on a building insulation test method. And it was very expensive because it required that you have this cold chamber to run the test in, which is a very expensive way to test things. So a few years back, MEC and REI and Cascade Designs and Nemo and a few other manufacturers got together and created this new ASTM standard, a standardized test to get R values for sleeping pads that would have a test protocol and a piece of test equipment that a manufacturer could buy and run their own tests in some economical fashion. And we're really excited about it because it means that eventually you can compare all these sleeping pads between different manufacturers and compare apples to apples, kind of a level playing field. But the bottom line is you, the consumer, win on this because all of a sudden you'll really be able to compare everything and know what you're getting. So now we're down to the big reveal, which is, did the new therm-a-rest pads actually get warmer and colder? And I'll use an example. This pad used to be an R3.9 pad. In the new test method, this is now an R5.4 pad. So did it get warmer? The answer is it didn't get warmer. If you slept on this pad, the only thing that's different is the test method. This is exactly the same pad. Actually, it has this new, the therm-a-rest pads have this new wing valve on them, which allows it to go one way. So when you blow in, you don't have to keep your mouth over it to keep the air from coming in. It's a one-way valve, and then you can twist it and it'll deflate. It has nothing to do with the warmth of the pad. It's a convenience, but it's not that big a deal. But the pads themselves are exactly the same. So what's happening with this pad? Well, when Cascades Design did the protocol for testing these NeoAir pads, they decided to be very conservative. So this is nominally 2.5 inches thick, and they decided that they would test it at 80% inflation. So they ran it 80% deflated, or a thickness of 2 inches. On the new test, they run these pads just as inflated and as full as you can get them, which measures 2.75 inches. And if you compare the ratio of the 2 inches for the old test versus the 2.75 inches fully inflated, that's about the increase from R3.9 to R5.4. So that's simply how the test is run, just as warm a pad. The other thing is that these foamy pads actually got a little colder. So the Z-Lite and the Ridge Rest, which I'm sitting on, got colder, and that has to do with the new test is putting more weight on a smaller area. And that doesn't bother these pads at all. These NeoAir pads sort of distribute that pressure, and it makes almost no difference in their thickness. But these pads can't distribute the pressure, so it actually, that greater weight on a smaller area compresses this pad more than the old test. And so these test slightly lower than the old values because they're getting more compression. Whether that actually equates, I mean, one, the difference isn't that big, and whether that actually equates to them being colder in the field is questionable. Again, probably not. This is just the same warmth pad that it always was. Hopefully you found this video useful. If you did, please like the video. Go ahead and follow my channel. Click on that bell so you get notified of new content coming up. We're going to have some great content, I know, on sleeping bags that's going to be super interesting to folks. So until then, this is Adventure Alan signing out and wishing you a great day.